So it's great to be back here. I thought, I think I spoke to this forum before, and I looked back, and it was back in April 2011, and I was talking about the Recovery Act, infrastructure investment, comparing the ARA and the Obama administration as a green, possibly a Green New Deal to Roosevelt's New Deal. I didn't say they were the same. I said they were, but it was a good, fun comparison. It was a lot of fun. But if you think about it, that was what, about 3.5 years ago. Things have changed so much. Back then when I spoke, LA's economy was still really struggling. Our unemployment rate peaked that year, July 2011, at 13.2%. So things changed pretty fast. Back then in April when we were talking together, none of you were here, but perhaps Da was here, there was talk about green shoots in the economy. There's hope. It's springy. It's spring. There's going to be an economic recovery this summer. And within a few months, that all disappeared because, you may recall, then new House Republican majority precipitated this debt ceiling crisis. A guy named Eric Cantor, which perhaps none of you know or remember, but he used to be the majority leader. He's got all his colleagues to flex their muscles and hold firm on not raising the debt limit. And they won a bunch of concessions from the Obama administration, had a bunch of spending cuts, but so that was victory for them. But in so doing, Standard & Poor's downgraded the national debt for the first time in our country's history. And the stock market plummeted because folks were worried about another global economic downturn. So arguably, we didn't really get out of this for a way that we could feel the recession get out of it until about maybe last year, I think. That's when people really started to feel it, that we were actually in full recovery. So we are officially 5 years into the economic recovery. As we're standing here in fall 2014, it's a totally different world. Our unemployment rate in California is 7.4%, and LA County is 8.1%. That's quite a difference from 13.2%. That's huge. Just a year ago, actually, we were almost at 10% in LA County, 9.9%. Construction and business professional services have led the recovery in California. Construction employers have added about 35,000 jobs from August last year. We also have an additional 93,000 professional and business services jobs here in California. In LA County, since last year, the professional and business services sector expanded payroll by about 32,000 jobs. Okay, so I said professional and business services sector. Note that, okay? There was also a 20,700 person job boost in the educational and health service employers. So that's really what's been driving the recovery in Los Angeles County, plus some return of construction. Manufacturing is falling. And what we are seeing is that even though we're back, not everything is rosy. Corporate profits are at a record high, but wages have stayed flat or even fallen. Just to give you a sense of how this all compares, corporate earnings have risen at an annualized rate of 20.1% since the end of 2008. So corporate profits have risen every year by 20% since 2008. Okay? But a new study by the Economic Policy Institute has shown that essentially wages have either been flat or fallen during that same period. In fact, you can go all the way back to 1979, and you know that wages have not kept pace with the growth in productivity, with the growth of profits. So when you adjust for inflation, we know that the compensation of top US executives has doubled or tripled since the first half of the 1990s, which is like supposed to have been the excessive period of time. So it's really done, corporate executives done very, very well, but the overall US wages have stayed flat or fallen. Okay. So I've got lots more statistics about that. The one thing I want, since I have to cut this short a little bit, the one thing I do want to kind of talk about is this sense of economic inequality. Some people blame it on a lack of regulation. Some people talk about it as the growth in information technology and how that's really changed, gotten rid of a lot of middle management jobs. Others have said it's the globalized economy. It's much more competitive. That's why wages have fallen. I was just looking at something in the Harvard Business Review. I got to quote this guy because I thought it was really interesting. William Lazanik, he notes that he thinks what's really happened is that since the 1970s, the approach in corporations and governance has changed radically. That back in the 70s, what would happen is you'd make profits in a corporation and then you'd reinvest it in the business. And a lot of that reinvestment would go into actually upskilling the skills of your workers or sharing the profits with your workers. And he says that that began to break down in the late 1970s. Then the dominant investment strategy became downsize and distribute and redistribute. So you were reducing costs, you were taking out profits, you were buying back your stock. Why would you buy back your stock? Because if you're a corporate executive, much of your compensation was in the form of stock. So the stock goes up, you get more profit. It's not about reinvesting in your workers. So this is a guy writing in Harvard Business Review. So whatever you want to say the cause is, for Los Angeles, what this has meant, many, many decades of this type of process is, hit the slide, but what you're going to see is this pie chart that we prepared for the Goldhirsch Foundation as part of the LA 2050 project that Professor Myers was a part of. And it shows you divide up the pie. There are basically 5 quintiles. I know you guys are smart. You've taken statistics. So we've divided up the economy in quintiles. The top quintile, meaning that top 20%, actually earns 52% of all the income in Los Angeles County, okay? The 4th quintile, the upper middle class, is another 22%. Look down at the 2nd quintile, the working class, is about 8%. So the population isn't distributed like this. That top quintile is a very small number of people that have more than half of all the income and wealth in LA County. We are the most unequal major metropolitan area in the country, and we have now gained the distinction of being the most unaffordable region in terms of housing in the country. Your Lusk real estate report just came out on multifamily, and this probably doesn't surprise any of you. Rents are increasing, vacancies are lowering, so this trend is probably going to continue. So that's really depressing. Okay. So the thing is, people kind of get that, right? So I can show you all these charts and I can give you statistics and quote a Harvard Business Review professor, but people get it too. So there was a political poll that was taken very recently of likely voters in swing states, and just 23% of people believe that their personal financial situation has improved over the last year, versus 30% who say it's gotten worse. 5 years into the recovery, right? Corporate profits are soaring. Regular people are saying, I'm not doing any better. In fact, I'm doing worse. Okay? 61% of them said that they lack the savings to grapple with an unforeseen job loss. 62% say the cost of basic household items like gas and groceries has strained their financing. There's another poll that the NBC News Wall Street Journal poll has took this summer, and only 50% of folks believe the economy was improving. 47% believe it's not improving. This is the one that kills me. 76% of adults, this is nationwide, lack confidence that their children's generation will have a better life than they do. 76%. That is at an all-time high for the history of this country. This is the land of opportunity where you're always supposed to do better than your parents, and your parents believe that you will do better than they did, and suddenly 76% think worried their kids just aren't going to do as well. Okay, so if you don't like the pie chart, and if you don't like the statistics, and some of those attitudes are resonating with you, what should you do about it? Well, the name of my topic is, have you had it with the widening divide? Check out Equitable Economic Growth Models. Your community will thank you for it. It's new and improved, it's different, but it's an antidote to what we see as this systemic, continued income inequality that's just growing and growing and has caused this kind of malaise in our country and our psychology of our country. Okay, so Americans, regular people, they're worried about the direction of this country, but they're not the only ones. Even philanthropy is worried. Even big foundations like Ford and MacArthur and Rockefeller, the folks that fund a lot of the good work that you may do in the future in your career, they're worried about this. They've been funding things like sustainability for years now. I got to ride that bandwagon when I was at Green for All, and when I first started working with foundations, and we would talk about sustainability and green jobs all the time. But that rhetoric is now shifting. Now the rhetoric from foundations is about resilience, and resilience is not about hope. Resilience is about cataclysm. How do we prepare for the worst? The other rhetoric that a lot of foundations are using is the rhetoric of equity. They want to figure out how to shift this, how to change the way the pie is divided up, how to change the size of the pie and make sure it's shared more equitably. So they're grappling around to try to fund ideas and projects and organizations and campaigns that will achieve equitable economic development. So what is that? What is equitable economic development? Fundamentally, it comes down to shifting the way that capital is distributed within our regional economies. We want to make sure that economic benefits, workforce development opportunities, environmental sustainability, and community-oriented social and cultural resources are more evenly distributed, okay? This is an inclusive model of economic growth that tries to harness what's happening in the economy, the natural flows of capital, tries to harness that so that you can get broader benefits for more people, so that all neighborhoods can have good jobs and decent and safe, affordable housing, good infrastructure, clean and healthy, safe neighborhoods, a sustainable environment, responsive local institutions. You can take that off, but I actually like having it up there because I just want it to be emblazoned in your brain, okay? Because this is real. Some people frame this Policy Link, which is a Bay Area group. They're really good, by the way. If you're interested in this kind of work, you should check out their website. They tend to frame equitable economic development and equitable growth in the rhetoric of access. Let's give people access to clean and safe environment, access to affordable housing, access to that. But others try to have a more transformative and maybe a more radical approach to this is, how do we just shift the way that money flows? How do we shift the flow of capital? How do we make sure that government's not exacerbating this trend through deregulation or by providing massive subsidies without any accountability to corporations? And the one that comes to mind most dramatically is Tesla, right? What Tesla was able to do in picking the pockets of the people of Nevada. $1 billion, and the LA Times did a wonderful article about that, kind of breaking down the overestimate of all of the jobs and benefits that Tesla promised would come from that massive subsidy. I do know folks in Sacramento who said at the time that Tesla was dangling their gigafactory around before the states, they informed the state of California, hey, you got to give us $500 million cash straight up, no strings attached, before we'll even talk to you about putting this plant in California. Even though Tesla is only still in business because of the subsidies for the green economy and electric vehicles that came from the state of California's cap and trade program, okay? So that type of unaccountable redirection of public investment towards private actors who can minimize or eliminate any risk for private capital and then take all the upside, externalizing the risk for public sector so that the risk goes on the people rather than on the corporation. That kind of activity is what we at least want to stop. So when we talk about equitable economic development, just to break it down, you can think about it in 3 really simple phrases, okay? And I'll give you examples of these. You got to invest in people, you need to invest in the place, and you have to invest in leadership. When we talk about people, it means making sure that workers, that regular people, have the skills they need to get decent jobs. Right now, if you look around in metropolitan Los Angeles, our skills mismatch is quite extreme. We have a lot of people with very low levels of achievement and education. We have public school systems that are broken, that don't provide the type of basic skills necessary to get the types of jobs that would provide good family supporting wages. There are communities that have a hard time accessing high quality education and training facilities. This is sad and ironic because California used to be actually the golden state for workforce development and training. with the master plan for higher education. Everybody could go to university or college for a modest sum. I was just at a Cal State LA event where Billie Jean King talked about how she went to Cal State LA for $47 a semester. And that's how she was able to go to college and then go on to become a Wimbledon star. You guys probably don't even know who Billie Jean King is, right? Gosh, now I know I've crossed over, speaking of which. Okay, so, but my point is, you could go to a great university, Cal State, you go to UC, you go to community college for basically free, and you could have access to this great training program, and it worked. We attracted people from all over the country and all over the world. We had one of the most highly skilled workforces. We had cutting edge industries like aerospace that paid good paying wages, right? And allowed people who maybe didn't even have a university education to be able to support their families and send their kids off to school. How I went to Harvard, my dad was in aerospace, okay? So we want to create these clear pathway of training for the good jobs that are here now and are going to be growing. Let me look at my time here. We also want to invest in place. So we have to make sure that we make our communities places where people want to invest. So that means basic infrastructure. Our streets should not become like hazard zones for anybody that are walking or riding their bike or even driving, right? We shouldn't have sewer mains and water mains breaking every other week. We actually need to invest in our infrastructure more than 110 years, once every 110 years. So this is something that we need to remedy the underlying deficiencies in our physical infrastructure and also make our communities attractive, right? Urban design matters. You guys are planners. It does matter how it appears and how it feels. And we have to invest in leadership. Really good, strong leadership is not just having community-based organizations that are organizing and doing great work. That is important. But it also requires a partnership with somebody in local government, in regional government, in government, whether they're elected or appointed officials or just your mid-level bureaucrat, that actually has competency and has strong values about protecting the public good. That issue of leadership is critical. You guys may know a little bit about Detroit, right? Detroit became the poster child of failure, the poster child of kind of the end of American dominance in manufacturing. And also what happens to a city where folks flee, where most of the talent leaves. You had a city that's lost a third or more of its population. It's shrinking its boundaries. It's also a place that fundamentally lacked civic capacity. So when the recession hit, the Great Recession hit, many, many funders poured hundreds of millions of dollars into Detroit. And they're now looking back 7, 8 years, and many have kind of dissected the results of those investments and have identified one of the major failures. There wasn't local capacity, skilled, competent, honest, civically engaged leadership that could take advantage of that investment and direct it in a positive way for that community. There just wasn't. There had been so much flight of talent that it was very hard to build that back. Interestingly, just a side note on Detroit, there's now been kind of a movement for folks returning back home to Detroit, or urban pioneers. In fact, a person I used to work with at Green for All, who was from Detroit, just got a job with the Kresge Foundation in Detroit, working in her hometown, and she's thrilled to be back there to apply all the things she learned in California to Detroit. So invest in people, invest in place, invest in leadership. So when I say that, what are these things? What are we investing in? What are we trying to get them to do? What does an equitable economic policy look like? What we're trying to do is we're trying to catalyze private investment to go to the places where we want it to go and to lay the foundation so that currently disadvantaged communities kind of get the capacity, the skills, the infrastructure, and the leadership they need to get good outcomes economically. So here's some examples. Okay. And a lot of these, I can actually give you examples here in California. First is, I mentioned the importance in investing in infrastructure. So how many of you ride Metro? Ever ridden the rail lines? And which ones do you ride? We're here.
Red line.
The red line, where do you go?
From Los Feliz down to downtown.
That's pretty good. How is that?
Fine.
Yeah?
Yeah, sometimes you have to wait a little long for the train, besides that.
That's pretty fast, right?
Yep.
Do you have a car?
Yes.
Do you prefer to take the car, or do you like to take the metro?
It depends. If I'm going to downtown, I'd rather take the metro.
Yeah, because it's really crowded and congested, and it'll be hard to get around. Who else takes a different line? Anybody take other than the red line? Maybe take, yeah. All right. Oh, that's not fair. You work for me. Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
I take the gold line. I do the parking rides with the gold line from East LA over to Union Station, and then take either the red or purple line over to Pershing Square.
There you go. Great. So all those investments, the gold line, the red line, all of that were multi-decade investments in basic infrastructure, public transit infrastructure in Los Angeles. And some of the more recent lines, has anybody ever taken the Expo line yet? Expo line rocks. Okay, that is amazing. Okay, so that money came out of Measure R. I don't know, you may have already heard about it, but here's what changed in Los Angeles. In order to pass all those sales taxes to fund that infrastructure investment, there had to be a big coalition of folks coming together to convince voters in the middle of a recession to vote for a half-cent sales tax. You guys were probably not here, or maybe not politically conscious when this happened, but we were in recession already, and voters passed this half-cent sales tax to fund these types of rail and also bus improvements and other improvements. And the way it was achieved was this coalition of transit advocates and your typical folks, environmentalists, but also labor, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, enviros, affordable housing folks, my friends. But all of these folks came together around not just getting a tax passed, but also making sure that the way the money was spent and that the way the contracts were given out would create direct benefit for the people living in Los Angeles. So Metro approved as part of, first they got their sales tax passed, but the quid pro quo of this massive campaign countywide was that there would be a construction careers policy approved as part of that, so that people from low-income communities would have a chance to actually help build the rail lines. And it was hard to do that. You had to get the unions to agree to open their apprenticeship programs to regular folks, regular African-American folks who don't have kinship relationships with the union leaders, folks who had been cut out of the labor system for decades. You suddenly had to let them get into the apprenticeship programs, and then you had to, the deal was that the contractors that got awarded these massive contracts to build the rail lines, they had to hire a certain percentage of apprenticeship. And once you are in the union apprenticeship program, you're basically guaranteed a job, right? Because they don't put anybody in an apprenticeship unless it's a job for them at the end of the day. So this was a new way of looking at tying infrastructure investment to actual local job creation. You're looking at your watch, Marlene, so I better pay attention. Okay.
I intended to do that.
Okay. It was excellent. Okay. So this kind of work was done in transportation investments. We've done it in public works projects for new sewer construction. We did it at the redevelopment agency that John and I were a part of together. Every time we put $1 million or more into a private development project as a subsidy, we made sure that they had to hire 30% local folks on their construction project. 10% of them had to be from disadvantaged communities. That was radical. It had never been done in the whole country before, and we created this model. That's the type of program that takes the benefits of economic development dollars, and makes sure that it feathers itself out through the whole community. Other ways to kind of do this are programs that might leverage advances in technology, right? Advances in technology like biotechnology or clean tech. We've been doing some work to help with Cal State LA to create an incubator called Biospace LA on their campus. And that incubator, part of it is to make sure that not just professors from Cal State LA have a place to go and play and do their experiments and create companies, but it's really more so that students have access to entrepreneurs in the bioscience field and access to on-the-job training as these companies are being formed. And the idea is the companies will incubate, they will locate in our corridor, not right next door, and they will make relationships with students and professors and postdocs, and they'll be able to then hire local workers. So those are some of the examples of some of these efforts. Another quick example is anchor institution strategies, where you have a big hospital, for example, that they have to buy laundry services from somebody, or they have to buy groundskeeper services from someone. Wouldn't it be great if they were to recycle those dollars in the surrounding community? And this is something that's been done really effectively in Cleveland. They formed workers' cooperatives that have worked with the hospital complexes in Cleveland, so that the workers and business people within Cleveland actually see the money recycled for their major hospitals. So it's been quite successful. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up by telling you, what does it take to actually do an equitable growth model? There's about 5 or 6 things. I have half a minute for each, so here's what it takes. One is you need to have an enduring coalition of key community stakeholders. That means community-based organizations, labor, faith-based, folks like that, maybe environmental, maybe affordable housing, but it has to cross many sectors, and it has to be an enduring coalition around shared values and shared goals. And maybe it's the number of jobs that are created, it's the kind of jobs that are created, but they have to go back and have these shared goals. Second, these coalitions have to have good research, good, focused, credible research to help them figure out what their campaign should be, who should they be targeting, what could they actually accomplish, right? And how should they measure success? And that's where universities actually play an important role. You have here on campus, PIRI, I never say it right, Manuel Pastor's group, PIRI? Yeah. They do fantastic work, and they've played this role for a lot of community-based organizations where they do basic research for them that gives them the tools that they need to target things. The other, I'll say it right now, UCLA Labor Center has played an important role in this, and most recently you'll see this. Eric Garcetti, the mayor's proposal for minimum wage, has been, every article you read about it quotes a UC Berkeley Labor Institute study that played the same role. So universities have an important role to play. The coalitions also have really good skills at communications, effective communications and media skills. They also need to have the active support of someone inside. It can't just be an outside strategy. So they need an elected official who's resourceful and savvy, shares their values, and is willing to fight for this policy. And that's sometimes the hardest thing to do. And then this campaign and this coalition has to set measurable goals and find a way that they can hold themselves and others accountable for achieving them. A couple of other things. I talked about the elected officials, but you also need to have senior and mid-level bureaucrats inside the beast to help you implement these policies. You can implement a fabulous policy, but if none of the bureaucrats, none of the folks who are there day in, day out believe in it, somehow it's just not going to get implemented, because elected officials don't actually do anything. They just pass things. They make speeches. It's the regular line bureaucrats who implement the policies. So those folks need to be brought along as well. And then lastly, it just takes time. Forming these coalitions, establishing the trust, doing the research, identifying the right campaign, getting the media savvy that you need, getting political power, getting somebody elected who's your champion, and actually turning the corner with some mid-level staff, finding the person inside that's going to give you the report, that's going to support your data, that's going to help implement your policy. So in parting thoughts, we don't have a lot of money in California for economic development anymore. Redevelopment ended. What John and I used to do is long gone, right? So we have a fraction of the amount of money we used to spend on redevelopment. A fraction of that amount is now available for economic development, which means that every dollar needs to be spent addressing this and not doing what Tesla did, okay? Because we don't have $1.5 billion to throw away, okay? We need to make sure that we're addressing the worst inequities in our system and redirecting capital flows to get better outcomes. So we need to be focused, we need to be strategic, and most importantly, we need to be really clear about what our goals are. Is it any kind of job? Is it jobs that pay a certain amount? Is it jobs in dying industries, or is it jobs, or we only want jobs that are jobs of the future? But whatever it is, we have to set clear goals that reflect our values, that we hold accountable, people accountable to, measure our success, and hold our elected officials accountable to those results. Because we actually don't have time to waste. This can't get any worse. If it does, our civic culture will continue to suffer. So with that, I'm going to send it off to John.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Cecilia. So I'll make it brief, and then I want to open it up for some questions. I have a few questions that I made notes. But I think a lot what Cecilia is talking about, as I view it, is, and from sort of a practitioner standpoint and future practitioner standpoint, is how can we help to channel some of this investment into places like South Los Angeles or low and moderate communities. That's what I spend a lot of my time doing, is figuring out how to implement or create programs that will not only channel government spending, but more importantly, private lending, as well as, even more important than that, the risk money, that equity capital, which is very difficult in some of these communities. So spend a lot of time convincing people that they should invest in these areas because these areas can provide returns. They might not be the same returns that you would get elsewhere, but they do provide returns. Let me just give you a little quick example of this that I was thinking about during this, is that we talk a lot about investing in place and in people, and that is absolutely important. We did a program with the university called Bridges to Business Success, whereby we carved out 25 construction contracts, not as a sole source, but to 25 small and medium-sized contractors that were viewed as local contractors, disadvantaged contractors, and had them compete amongst themselves to bid on work that we had, and then we let out our standard contract with these people, and these contractors were fantastic. Most all of them finished their jobs on time, performed better with respect to change orders and increased costs and so forth. So my message is always that, surprisingly, on a grassroots level in some of these communities, when you do funnel resources and invest in those people, you're rewarded with results that are economic as well as just good results. We're very happy with the work product and the workmanship and so forth. So I know that's occurring, but that's investment in place, because this was affordable housing that we were talking about here, but it was also involved workforce development, business development, if you will. But I want to, with that, and I don't say that to pat myself on the back, but I say that because these things can work, and I don't really know what the ultimate effect is how many other contracts were landed because of this and so forth. And that's sort of something that Cecilia talked about, being able to sort of measure some of these outcomes in an effective way. But I would like to shift gears and maybe get a little off topic. It's interesting, the Tesla example that Cecilia talked about. And I have a couple of questions. There's a lot of debate right now, and this might be off topic right now, that's always perplexed me about investing in the entertainment industry in Los Angeles. Yeah. So I have sort of a twofold sort of thought and question on that. One is, how far does that go? The first is the cost-benefit question, because there's a school of thought that this is a waste of taxpayer dollars, and there's a school of thought that we're losing this industry, and Michigan and Louisiana are giving these huge tax credits, so that's what the market is, and we have to meet that. So that's sort of, what's the science lately on cost-benefit on that? And then secondly, how far down does that multiplier affect in terms of the jobs and the income reach? I come at this without any great science behind it, but I did work on a project when I was in Downey, whereby we facilitated, through reuse of a contaminated site, a studio to be built, a sound stage, large sound stage, because it seemed like the thing to do. And it's defunct, it's closed now. It failed. It was outside of the 10 miles, so there were certain kinds of per diems that didn't have to pay. They had sort of a cost advantage and so forth, but it seems sexier than it was economical, quite frankly. And so, I think part of leadership too is admitting your failure too. That was a failure. That's defunct and it's being redeveloped, but that failed. So that's sort of one question and thought that I'd like to think about, because this debate comes over and over again. It comes up in these large-scale projects like sports stadiums and public investment and that type of stuff. And then I guess I'll frame one other question too, throwing it back to you, Cecilia, is if there's an economic development in the context of equitable economic development, where you could get all the Sacramento policymakers sort of swim together and pass one sort of important piece of legislation going forward in the next 2 or 3 years, what would that be? So
that's a good one.
So that's it. You guys can join in and ask other questions. But I'm curious. I did go off topic, and we didn't talk about this. We did talk beforehand, but I went off topic on the film industry question.
No, I don't think it's off topic at all. And it's one I struggle with because you know, I believe that part of what you should do in practicing economic development is really know your region, right? What works in one region is not going to work in another. You have to know where your jobs are, what they pay, how competitive the folks in that industry are relative to others. Is this an export-oriented industry or not? I mean, data is very, very important. And yet, when it comes to the entertainment industry, there is something about it that so, you know, when we can do these kind of very green eye shade analysis about pretty much any industry and be very forthright about the costs and benefits, like stadiums, look, that's a bad deal, okay? It's just a bad deal, and though my friends in labor fought very hard to get the AEG deal passed, and went so far as to support legislation that essentially exempted them from most of the California Environmental Quality Act. And though my labor friends are important to me, I just know every study that's even moderately reasonable shows that investments for things like football stadiums in particular that only have 8 games a year, bad idea, okay? Bad idea. Just doesn't have the return on investment. But the entertainment industry is interesting because otherwise reasonable people, they go crazy with the entertainment industry. Like there's something about it, there's a mystique about it for Los Angeles. And so even I have a hard time saying, though I say it in the privacy of my own home, that was really crummy that we gave them, was it $400 and something million in subsidies? Because it's no different than chasing money and offering these kinds of subsidies to Boeing or Ford or General Motors, all the stuff that industries have done in the past. Now, maybe the only difference is that it has played a unique role in our culture and in our economic development. That the entertainment industry is more than just the sum of its parts. It's more than just the multiplier effect on a particular production. We have an agglomeration of lots of craftspeople that have emerged over almost 100 years now, 100 years, from the entertainment industry, the people that build sets and designs this, and editors and post-production. They're all gathered here. We also attract a lot of different type of talent that's related to media, right? Not the old particular entertainment industry, but new media and app development. That's also really important. So you can kind of construct an argument that this is unique because of its legacy in Los Angeles. We own this industry now. We've let it go. We should do everything we can to keep it. But then I get worried because the way these subsidies are provided, it's per production. Is there anything more ethereal than filming a movie? It causes a lot of jobs and they pay really well, but then it's over, right? Now, maybe there's an argument on a series because they stay and they continue to invest in the community, right? They're there for years, and if it's a successful series, it can be there for years, and that could be really good. So I'm not sure where I come out, because I too get blinded by the mystique of the entertainment industry, though I can't name any current stars, you know, but I don't watch TV anymore, I have children. So it's, and I don't go to movies because I have children. Remember that before you have children. But I do think that this is a little bit different because of the confluence of new media, content, craftsmen, truly craftsmen. Right? The unions in the entertainment, they are craftsmen at what they do, and they pay good wages, and they're geographically based. So I'm not sure where I come down. I just waffled on you.
A lot of the labor came in from other places. There was hopes that in a community that there'd be a capture of sales tax, there'd be a capture of a lot of things. And a lot of the labor, because of the nature of production, was in and out, you know, fulfilling the, you know, the requirements of that particular production.
Yeah.
And then another production house would come in. So, you know, we didn't see the local benefits from a jobs or a tax revenue standpoint. And so that sort of, you know, informs / prejudices me towards thinking that these don't have, you know.
And you guys finance the cost of building a soundstage.
No, we wrote down the land partially. Well, de facto the same thing.
It's the same thing. You help to clean up or something. Yeah, right. So versus these tax credits, which are due production here, and here's the queue. So I think a lot of it is, how do you qualify for the tax credit? What's the commitment to local jobs and to enduring jobs? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know the industry well enough to know how you could write a clawback provision in that subsidy so that if the jobs didn't stay, and if they just picked up production and then after that 1 year of tax breaks, moved the production of the television series to Louisiana, can you claw back? I don't know, it's a good point. Your second question was if there was
if everybody was swimming together on one important economic development initiative, what would that be? And,
yeah, I think for me, it would be a recurring source of revenue that could be distributed to cities, well actually metropolitan areas, so now I really am thinking big sky, right? Mm-hmm. The state would dedicate a recurring source of funding, separate from the general fund, a different source of revenue that would come in that is not, if the best thing would be a source that is counter-cyclical, right? So that it doesn't fall when the economy is failing. But that source of revenue would be dedicated for economic development policies or practices or subsidies that regions, that metro areas or regions could use. And there'd be some that everybody could just get, a percentage, you get this like an entitlement, but the bulk of it would be competitive. And in order to get that money, you'd have to prove to the state that you'd aligned your workforce training system, your community college, if you have one in your community, align that with your industry analysis and your strategy for a regional economic development program. I think having that dedicated funding source coming through the state, I say that now even though I've spent most of my career in local government, I think that would be really important, but the measurement and the standards would need to be written into the legislation. That the measurement is about good paying jobs, and it's about the skill level, and it's about upskilling. It's investing in people, not just in companies. Because that's where we get into trouble, when we throw subsidies at a particular company. Right? They don't have any investment here. There's not any reason why they're tethered here. But people are our biggest asset. And so we should be investing in people's skills and then also the infrastructure, right? That's a great thing for local communities to invest in. Better sewers, better stormwater infrastructure, upgrading your grid, that kind of thing is a really good investment. So that's what I would do. I'd have some dedicated economic development funding source.
Kind of building off of what you talked about with regard to when you were talking about unemployment numbers, you said these are specific industries that you've seen growth in. And so with regard to Los Angeles, what are industries that you think we should be investing in? I've heard from LAEDC that they have this theory called like cluster, or something, industry clusters, but would love to kind of hear your thoughts around how to revitalize the industries.
Cluster strategies have been around in economic development thought for quite some time now, and it's sort of what I described. You understand what are the collection of businesses in a particular industry that you have a competitive advantage in. So, so for a while in California, and still true, aerospace, like we just rocked, and you do things like location quotient analysis, you know what that is? So how many businesses of that type do we have as compared to everybody else in the country? If we have a high concentration and a dense concentration, it's planners, it's usually geographically concentrated, just like the entertainment industry. People don't want to be around together, right? They want to, their supplier networks are all together and they make different parts and they have relationships. So this notion of clusters, San Diego is really known for some of its communications technology clusters, also known for bioscience, right? Los Angeles has a fashion cluster. Los Angeles also has a bioscience industry, but it's not geographically clustered. We're trying to create more of a geographic cluster through our East LA Bioscience Corridor project that we're doing for Supervisor Molina. So LAEDC regularly runs these numbers where they mention location quotient, and they put out, and they have about 14 industries they've identified. Ones that are in there are entertainment, tourism, I think fashion's in there, bioscience, green technology. They have very large categories. So those are all fine. I think for me, I would pick 2 or 3, and I'd really get to know beyond the macro level, NAICS code data sets, which just will tell you the businesses and their employment. It doesn't actually tell you or map the interconnections of the businesses. So that's the next level of analysis that needs to be done. So LAEDC says there's these 14. Okay, pick 2. Now map the relationships, understand how they work together, how much do they export, what do they really bring into the region, What do they need to expand? And if they got that support, would they continue to grow? You know, and really, because each industry is different and each geography is different, and LA County is gigantic, right? So I have a hunch that we're still pretty strong in some aspects of metal fabrication, aerospace. We're pretty strong in that, right? But we need to understand the connections a little bit better. We're pretty strong in advanced manufacturing, and that covers a lot of different fields, but it's the idea of using continuous improvement in technology for manufacturing purposes. I think we have a lot of potential in bioscience. It employs about 40,000 people in LA County. Entertainment industry is also very important. I don't quite get that industry, and I think it's hard to get behind the fluff, honestly. So I know it's important, but I wouldn't be able to tell you what I think the strategy should be. And I generally feel that small manufacturing concerns, small manufacturing businesses in Los Angeles County are critical. They employ a lot of people. We are the largest manufacturing center in the country. People don't know that. We are. It employs a lot of people, and on average, the wages are much, much better than the retail stuff and the service, lower income service industry jobs that are what's growing. So what's growing in LA County, I kept saying business and profession, that's growing, and some low-level service stuff is growing. We need to work on the middle. And the ones that I just identified, that's where there's some concentration in the middle. And then we have to make sure that we understand those industries so that we're training people to continue to be an asset to those industries so that they stay. And that we do things like not run them through the ringer when it comes to permitting, not run them through the ringer when they need to, you know, enhance their facility or expand. We need to clean that part of our act up as well. Yeah.
I have one question along those lines,
yeah.
Cecilia. There was a few years back, I know you worked on, there was a lot of pressure in the city of Los Angeles on the conversion of industrial land. My question, I guess, is that pressure still there, and sort of what's the status of that? Because, you know, I think at one time it was 7%, or maybe it was 9%, I don't know what the number was, of all the land in the city of Los Angeles, at least, was all that was zoned. Yeah.
Yeah, that's still correct, and the pressures now with the housing market rebounding and the lack of housing, affordable housing, there is still a pressure to convert a lot of industrial. So it's still an issue, but interestingly, I think what's left of it, there is a constituency out there in the business community to help preserve it. The thing about Los Angeles that I don't think is true of in a lot of cities, but it's definitely true in LA, is that throughout our history, real estate developers really have been the king. I mean, so they are an industry, but and they do make something, but they make the boxes in which the economic activity happens. They're not making the products that then get sold and then recycled into the economy, right? So when we were fighting that battle at CRA, the pressure from the real estate developers and their lobbyists and their lawyers and all the people that service them was enormous, and they would win every battle. I think it's maybe a little bit better now, but I think that as the housing market gets even more heated, the pressure to convert what's left of the industrial land will increase. It's just the way it is. So the question is whether we've learned anything through the Great Recession about the importance of retaining job lands, places where jobs can land and stay in Los Angeles. Los Angeles lost 1 million jobs since 1990. 1 million jobs, okay? And we're not growing that many jobs relative to our population. Other places are growing jobs. I'm talking about the city of Los Angeles. Other cities in LA County are growing jobs. The city of Los Angeles isn't, not in the same way. So I think that the mayor has figured that piece out. He talks about growing the number of jobs much more than the previous mayor did. The previous mayor was all about development, how many skyscrapers are going up versus how many jobs of people making things are here in our economy. So anyway, I also think that the nature of work is changing and the spaces required is transforming all the time. So how much space do you need for certain types of light manufacturing, advanced manufacturing stuff? How much space do you need for people who are developing apps, right? It's just a different configuration. It's just a different type of economic activity. So the physical way it's organized will change and the space requirements will change.
But going back to your original presentation, when you mentioned all the foundations that are active now, a lot of our money comes from grants through Ford, Kellogg, Getty, Rockefeller.
Nobody's better than Manuel in getting that money. I tell you, he's a master at it. Yeah.
He's a rockstar at it.
Yes.
But one thing that I know, there's this one foundation that has, I think, 13.7 billion in equity between two different institutions that has arisen in the last few years. And it kind of is emblematic of the golden age of philanthropy that is happening right now. And the last time that there were this many foundations that had such a large concentrated share of wealth was before the Great Depression. So I don't think it's a coincidence that, I mean, as much good as these foundations are doing, they're able to do what they do because they have billions and billions of dollars at the hands of a couple people. So I think that's symptomatic of the income inequality that has become kind of disparate. And that people kind of gloss over because of the work that these foundations do. And then the other thing that I don't think is talked about as much, and this is more of a question, LA spends about $290 million annually on bank fees, and that's more than the entire streets budget. Next City just had a publication about all these pension debt obligations that a lot of municipalities are falling prey to. And at the same time, a lot of planners that are involved in finance don't necessarily grasp or study how ingrained finance is within development nowadays.
Yeah.
I've been trying to figure out what black box investment is for the past few months, and I have no idea, and I don't think I'm going to know unless I turn to a math genius.
I don't know what black box investing is either.
Yeah, but it was a really big cause behind the Great Recession, and almost nobody knows what it is. And I mean, we don't study how the Glass-Steagall should return. We don't study how credit defaults to collateralized debt obligations kind of led to everything else.
Is that what you're calling black box?
No, black box investment is a quantitative analysis strategy that kind of surged at the forefront of Wall Street investment in the 1970s. I don't know anything beyond that, but it's. That's the
sum total of the Wikipedia entry.
Yeah, basically. I read books. It doesn't help. But I mean, it's at the front and center of finance now, and finance is at the front and center of localized development. So even though a lot of the work that we do is at the regional level or at the local level, and these municipalities, CDSAs, RNLAs, whatever you want to call it, they're increasingly globalized, a lot of our solutions are localized, whether it's the CBA or community land trust or other.
Because that's what we control.
That's what we can do, right? But at what point did that just turn into a Band-Aid on a bullet wound when all these institutional players are kind of controlling everything on a larger scale?
I'm with you. I mean, I used to give a speech during the recession about, because I did a lot of work with Green for All for state and local affairs, and you know, you have to pump up the troops on how important it is that they're doing their work at the local level. But then I would say, it's really nothing compared to what you can do at the federal level, and why it was so important to not bash ARA all the time, but actually take what you could out of it. Could it have been more? Heck yeah. It should have been $2 trillion, not $750 million, most of it going to things. Well, anyway, I have another speech on that. But I think the point is, local's important, and we've been investing a lot in it because for a long time, we didn't have anything in the federal government, right? There were 12 years of uninterrupted Republican dominance in the White House, and that makes a difference. Elections matter. State elections matter, and federal elections matter a lot. And the problem is that folks are so disillusioned with gridlock in Washington that they're just sort of throwing up their hands. It's just like, I don't care, it doesn't matter. It matters immensely. So I'm with you. We could talk about the precursors and the origins of the economic collapse, and it probably wouldn't start with George W. Bush. You'd look at the deregulation that happened under Clinton as some of the seeds that were planted to allow what occurred to happen. So my point is, I agree with you that we have to understand international capital flows, that the federal government plays an essential role in even creating the space for us to move locally or on the state level. We have to pay attention to that. But we're in a planning school. So of course we look local. Okay, thank you.